This video is all about new leaked, triple validated specs for the Sony a7R V, a camera that's going to be announced in just a couple of weeks on October the 26th at 3 p.m. London time or 10 a.m. Toronto or New York time. Details coming up, but first, I encourage you to subscribe and choose all notifications so you're kept informed on the latest camera gear, news, and rumors. Sony Alpha Rumors just posted a story about the a7R V, that it has an improved heatsink over the a7 IV. The heatsink is based off of the Sony a7S III, released back in August of 2020. Sony makes some really great cameras. Sony also makes some very small and compact cameras. It's part of their idiom, their methodology, their framework, their thoughts on producing cameras, that mirrorless cameras should be smaller because, well, they can be. And of course, that does pose some challenges when it comes to heat dissipation. Early on, Sony ran into trouble, their cameras not being able to produce more than 10 or 15 minutes of video before overheating. Well, Sony's done a lot to address that in the recent years. The Sony a7S III does a very, very good job of being able to record until the battery runs dry at 4K up to 120 frames per second, and that's quite impressive. So it's good news to hear from Sony Alpha Rumors that the heatsink that's going into the a7R V is going to be the same as in the a7S III. Sony Alpha Rumors says that the a7R IV will have the same or similar. Notice how it has similar in brackets. And I think the reason for that is it's going to take the same heatsink from the a7S III, but they probably had to tweak it or change it a little bit because of the size of the new camera is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a cross between the a7 IV and the a7S III in terms of design and size. So materially, I don't think there's going to be much difference in terms of capabilities, but getting that heatsink from the a7S III, I think is going to be a great boon for the a7R V. But that's all we have for leaked specifications. I know it's just one, so what I want to do is now let's recap. And if you already know the leaked specifications that we got for the Sony a7R V, you can probably skip this section and you're done for the day. But for everybody else, let's do a recap of the specifications. The a7R V is going to have a 61 megapixel sensor. That's the same resolution as the a7R IV. It doesn't mean it's going to be the same sensor, although I haven't got confirmation from any source at this point. All we know is that it's going to be 61 megapixels, and according to Sony Alpha Rumors, that's been triple validated or triple checked from multiple sources, and that's good news. But where we're going to get a huge performance is all going to be in the image processor. So it sounds like we're going to get a new Bionic XR processor. It's going to be really fast, high performance. Andrea from Sony Alpha Rumors has said many times that the increased throughput is going to be considerable in the a7R V. Other rumors has said it's going to be able to produce twice the throughput, and this is largely due to the new image processor. So that's definitely good news for both continuous still shooting or video shooting, as we're going to see here up in just a little bit when we talk about 8K and 4K video. But before we get into the video section, well, there's a few other things we need to talk about in terms of stills. Now, we don't know in terms of high-speed continuous shooting whether this camera can go 10 frames per second or a little bit more. But IBIS receives a rather large update. Apparently, the in-body image stabilization for the a7R V is supposed to be 8 stops. And that's a lot. And I know what you're thinking. 8 stops isn't an awful lot for IBIS. And no, you're correct. It isn't a lot with the lens attached, a lens that supports image stabilization. But according to what we're getting here, that's in camera. So that means if you attach another lens that had image stabilization within that lens, you would go north of 8 stops. I'm not so sure about this one here. I'm willing to concede that the camera will be able to support up to 8 stops of image stabilization, 5-axis image stabilization. The big but here, I think that's going to be 8 stops with the lens and the body attached. I don't think it's going to be just the body alone, but we'll just have to wait and see. But the one major improvement to this camera, the one that Sony Alpha Rumors keeps talking about, is a brand new autofocus system. Sony has one of the best autofocus systems out there when it comes to hybrid stills camera, right up there with Canon. And these two companies seem to be competing with each other recently, trying to outdo each other. When it comes to animal eye detection, bird eye detection, human, pets, dogs, vehicles, it's pretty incredible what these cameras are able to do. Well, this new autofocus system uses deep learning and artificial intelligence technology. And while I'm not going to get into all the details of it because I just don't have any details to give you, and while I could say, well, Canon's already done this with the 1DX Mark III, forget about that for a minute. What we want to focus on is, according to Sony Alpha Rumors, people who have been testing this camera can say that the autofocus system in the a7R V is considerably better than anything Sony has brought out to a stills hybrid camera. That's better than the Alpha 1, the a7S III, the a7 IV. It's going to be a whole new autofocus system, and this is going to be their new autofocus system that they're going to put in all of their mirrorless cameras coming forward. So this is looking pretty interesting and pretty exciting. I can't wait to see the actual results, the outcomes of this new autofocus system. And now for the video specs, but I want to touch on that new heatsink. This is rather significant. The heatsink that they're taking or adapting from the Sony a7S III, according to Sony Alpha rumors, it can do 24, 25 frames per second in 8K for up to 30 minutes. So it's got a time limit, which tells me that this camera, if you're going to be doing a lot of heavy shooting of 8K video at 24 and 25 frames per second, you might run into some overheating issues. So this is definitely a risk with this camera, at least the way it sounds right now, because Sony doesn't put time limits on their modes, not unless they feel that there's a certain limitation here in the camera and they want to prepare you ahead of time, and putting a hard-coded limit there is one way of doing that. So if you need to be able to record 8K video for longer than that, well, then you're looking at some pretty serious cinema cameras or the Sony Alpha 1. The a7R V is capable of 4K video at 24, 25, 30, 50, and 60 frames per second. And the good news, it's without a crop. So back to 8K. So does that mean that 8K has a crop? Yes, definitely. They're not providing us with any oversampled 8K. None of that 9.6K oversampled 8K that the camera was rumored to have. 8K is going to be cropped, and a rather significant crop considering the size of the sensor. But in 4K, you get uncropped 4K all the way up to 60 frames per second, and it does also support S-Cinetone. There's no mention of S-Log2 or S-Log3 or even HLG. But at this price point, I'd be really surprised if this camera doesn't offer those. All we know at this point is there's been no validation regarding S-Log2 and S-Log3. And as we see that in other cameras like the a7 IV, I'd be completely surprised if it's not here in the a7R V. All right, so let's talk about pricing here. This is one of the most common comments I get. What's the price going to be on the a7R V? At this point, we don't have anything validated. We don't have anything leaked. There was one rumor some time ago that said $3,500, but that's really the price of the a7R IV when it was announced back in October of 2019. Since then, 3 years have passed. In 2019, inflation was around 2%. For much of 2020, it was around 2 to 3%. And then, of course, in 2021, inflation took off at around 5 to 7%. So this is how I'm going to price it. On the low end, I'm going to take a 2% inflation rate across all years, with the exception of the last year. I'm going to place it at 3%. And that would give us a price around $3,700. However, if we take 2% and then 5% and 7%, that's going to give us a price between $4,000 and $4,100. A huge increase over the a7R IV. But this is not something that Sony's having to deal with by themselves. Everybody out there that's making a product, that's hiring staff, that's pulling minerals out of the ground and fabricating something, well, they're having to pay a steep cost for increased energy costs, for electricity, other resources. And even if this camera does go to $4,000, it's not like you're going to be able to go to the competition and expect to save anything. Canon has been raising prices across the board, so has Sony, and so has Nikon, so has Pentax. While I can't give you any exact pricing on the a7R V at this point, nothing in terms of validated leaked pricing, I can tell you that the pricing is going to be probably unlikely anything less than $4,700, but not to exceed $4,100. So if you want to stay up to date on the latest news and rumors regarding the Sony a7R V or any other camera brand, go ahead and click subscribe, but please make sure you choose all notifications. That's the key. By choosing all notifications, as soon as I publish a new video like this one here, you'll get notified by YouTube. So that way you can stay up to date on the latest news and rumors. But more importantly, it saves you an awful lot of time. You don't have to scour the internet following all the latest Twitter feeds, RSS feeds, all the latest news articles on the websites, on all sorts of news sites, or even YouTube sites. So go ahead and subscribe and choose all notifications so you can stay up to date on all the latest camera news and rumors. I cover all the major brands and all the major news stories. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.